Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today with my friend and colleague, Kathy Costello, who is a nurse practitioner with the National MS Society. I'm Roz Kalb, and I'm a psychologist with Can Do Multiple Sclerosis. And today we want to talk to you about how to handle risks. As we all know, there are a lot of risks around us right now, and people often have questions about how to deal with them. So I'm going to ask Kathy first to talk about the kinds of risks that people with MS have been talking to you about, have been contacting the National MS Society about. What's going on for people right now?
Well, thanks, Roz, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here with you today. It's always fun when we're able to work together. But I think the topic of risk occurs all the time. I think that we're always weighing risks and benefits, and that's whether you have MS or you don't have MS. We're always thinking about these things. Should I do that? Should I not? But when it comes to MS, there's just a myriad of questions around risks and benefits. So aside from the current crisis that we're in, we are always kind of going over the risks and benefits of treatments, for instance, the risks and benefits of activity, of how much stress I have in my life. What are the risks of that? So I think we're always trying to weigh risks and benefits. But when it comes to the COVID-19 crisis, some really specific risks come up. And those are, am I going to get this because I have MS? That answer is no. There are other questions. Am I going to have a worse outcome? Probably not. There are other risks. Is there a risk to my disease-modifying therapy? That's possible, but probably still unlikely. So there's even risks of, should I go out? Should I stay at home? Should I work? Should my spouse be working? Am I under risk because my spouse or partner is out working and then coming home? So we're always trying to weigh and understand, is it a risk? And then how much of a risk is it? And so I think that these are really difficult questions right now because this is a new virus. I mean, when we first had it described, it was called the novel coronavirus, right? Meaning it had never before 2019 been seen in human beings. So we've only been encountered with this since December, okay? It's April. That's not a lot of time to know everything we need to know about the risks that are associated with this virus. So we're trying to move along based upon information and knowledge we already have, and then applying that to this situation, knowing that as we learn more, that may change.
Okay. So let me zero in and ask you a couple specific questions just for clarity. So you said that when people ask if they are at greater risk of contracting the virus because they have MS, we don't think that's the case. Is that what you said?
That is absolutely true. The diagnosis of MS does not make it more likely that that individual is going to contract this infection, COVID-19. That is true.
So other things that people are concerned about, they know that the disease of MS is related to their immune systems. And so they're wondering, I believe, whether their immune system, which in MS we know is overactive, if that protects them in some way or makes them more vulnerable in some way. So you've said it doesn't appear to make people more vulnerable. Is there anything else that they need to know in terms of the risks of taking supplements or other products that are for boosting the immune system?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is another one of those risk benefit kinds of questions, of course. And so traditionally speaking, when it comes to supplements that are thought to boost the immune system, those have not been recommended for people with MS. Because sometimes when you boost the immune system, you can rev up the cell types that can provoke more inflammation in the brain and the spinal cord of people with MS. So while the immune system is different in people with MS because there's an autoimmune process going on, right? So there are certain cells that have become sensitized to cells and tissues in the brain and the spinal cord. And then when those cell types become activated, they may cause inflammation and damage in the central nervous system. But people with MS are not immunosuppressed because of having MS. They might, I would call it immunodifferent, because their immune systems are different, and they in fact they're provoking an autoimmune process. But to say that they're weak, that's not true. To say that you're more susceptible, that is not true. Different, yes. And so you don't want to overstimulate it. And so sometimes those supplements that can stimulate the immune system might stimulate some of the bad cells in people with MS to do things like cause inflammation.
So the other thing I heard you say, I think, is that the fact that somebody has MS is not likely to make COVID-19 worse if they do contract it. Is that something that it's too soon for us to know for sure, or are we trying to find that out?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So it's not likely, and I say that because this is a new virus, but based on knowledge of how people with MS experience other types of infections, again, just because of having MS does not necessarily make that infectious process worse.
Great.
But this is new. We're in unprecedented territory here. And so the National MS Society and the Consortium of MS Centers got together and developed a database. And this database is open to healthcare providers in North America to enter cases. So people who have MS and have been unfortunate and have gotten COVID-19. And so what happens? What happens to those people? There's an outcome. And thankfully, the vast majority of people, including those with MS, are going to recover and be fine. But what we're trying to learn with the database is that influenced in any way by the drugs that they take, whether it's their disease-modifying therapy or other medications? Is it related to underlying conditions like hypertension or obesity or diabetes, as it is in the general population? So without belaboring it, I think it's to help us understand what are the outcomes, which would attend to that question of, if I have MS, is my course and therefore my outcome going to be worse? And then what are the things that influence that? And so we hope to be able to have those data, not right away, because you need to have some people in the database to be able to understand what's happening. But over time, I think we'll be able to answer it. And we'll also combine our data in North America with some of the other data that's being collected elsewhere in the world. We've tried to harmonize what we're collecting so that at some point we have a group of people in the databases, the various ones, that we can look at collectively and get a better understanding of what's happening. I wish we had that information right now, but we just don't. So we're working as quickly as possible to get that information.
Well, we'll have to check back with you later when you've got some of those great data, because I think it will be really interesting to see what we learn.
Well, I have a question for you, Roz. And you know, when we talk about risk, and obviously that's what we are talking about, sometimes what we hear from people is that they've gotten information from, say, their healthcare provider about what they should or shouldn't do, and somebody in their family thinks that's all hogwash, and they disagree, and it causes quite a bit of conflict for people. Because you're trying to do what you feel is the right thing. Your loved one feels that maybe you're a little over the top with that, or the reverse could be true. And so how do you think people can navigate that? I mean, this is a big problem.
Well, I know I'm a psychologist. I'm supposed to have great answers for things like this. But I think the reality is that this is an issue now all of us are dealing with, right? So in our family, what we try to do, and neither of us is living with MS, but we are older, and so we have to think about our risk factors as older people living in this environment. We do two things. One is we try to pick sources of information we trust. In our house, we listen to Dr. Fauci because he is a respected and well-known person with probably more expertise in this area than anybody. So we feel rather than listening to lots of voices talking at us from different sides, that we need to pick one source. And you may pick a different source, but I think it's important to pick somebody and argue about that if you need to, but pick your source. And then I think in a situation where one person is living with a chronic illness like MS or any other condition, it's also important to use that person's healthcare provider as a source of trusted information. And then together, you have to weigh risks and benefits. So a common conversation in our household is, I say, I'm going to go to the grocery store. And my husband, whom you know, says, what do you need? And I say, well, you know, we're going to run out of XYZ. And he says, well, how close are we to running out? Are you going to feel less anxious about it? Or are you going because you need something? That's very helpful for me because I realize that I'm making a decision based on a feeling of I need to do something. I need to get out. I need to prop up the supplies. It's not based on the necessity of going out. And I think what we all have to do today when we're having these conversations about risk is asked, we have been told, do not go out. We've been told that by lots of people now. Do not go out. So we have to approach each decision as, is it important? Why is it important? Can we put it off a little bit longer? And negotiate it that way. I think people who are saying everybody's overreacting are gradually coming to see that there's not a lot of overreaction going on. That in fact, we need to be more reactive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think that what we hear is that there's this disagreement, and I think what you've said is can families, partners, kind of look at things in that rational way, and get at the reasons why we want to do the things that we're doing. I think when it comes to someone's health care and when it comes to what advice someone has given, and then when someone else doesn't agree with it, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But perhaps the advice is that you've asked that healthcare provider because he or she holds a certain amount of knowledge and information and is trying his or her level best to provide you with good advice. So let's look at that rationally and maybe not some of the things that you may have heard on a news channel, for instance, that might refute that. So I think it's looking at the source of the information that's provoking the decision, and then kind of taking away some of the emotion around it and really looking at the facts.
I agree totally. And that's why I think picking your sources, if you can agree on the one or two sources that you trust and believe in, then it takes out that you said this and I said that. This is what our best experts are advising us. Let's make our decisions together based on that. And that way we're always taking into account the most important